Welcome back to Second Breakfast. We're doing something a little bit different today. It's sort of a reading diary. So I've been reading the first Dune book. If you'll remember, we did an episode on the Dune movie that came out a few years ago. We loved it. The thesis of that episode was sort of us falling in love with that new world. And because of the same reason no one was going to the movie theaters around that time, we saw that movie at home, which is a very different experience.
Right.
And we had the absolute joy, the pleasure, the delight of seeing Dune Part 1 on the biggest IMAX screen in Texas last week.
Yes, it was so much fun.
40% of that movie, roughly, is shot for IMAX, which made it one of the largest experiences I've ever had with a work of art.
It was pretty incredible, and we loved the movie when we watched it at home, but it was, anytime you see a movie in a theater, it's going to be better, but this, everybody says that, but this was truly a completely different experience, and I left that theater thinking, that is one of the best movies I've ever seen.
I was buzzing. And I feel like all of Denis Villeneuve's movies benefit from the theatrical experience because he has such a perfect eye.
Yeah.
All of his movies are gorgeous, down to Sicario, Prisoners, Enemy. They're all haunting and memorable, but this one was just epic.
Yeah.
Like that word, I mean, the millennials sort of ruined that word, but
we sure did.
in its original sense, it really feels like an epic back to the Greeks almost.
Absolutely.
So I launched into the book when we got home.
And if you'll remember, OG Second Breakfast fans remember that when we were wrapping up The Lord of the Rings, we were debating doing Dune as our next big fantasy read through. We ended up not doing that, but we've always thought about it. And I did read a bit of the first book during peak pandemic. We were stuck at home. I was
Probably
reading a
after
lot.
the movie.
No, it was before the movie because we were still in New
Okay.
York. I read a bit of the first book and I liked it. I just wasn't in the mood at the time, so I put it down. But Cam's been just blazing through it these last, 5 days.
Yeah. So basically the first book, which is beefy. The second book, which it will be the third movie if that gets greenlit, which wraps up Paul's story, and then there's a huge time jump. The first book, which is a big boy, is divided into 3 books, 3 parts.
Okay.
So this discussion is going to be about book 1, which is called Dune.
Great.
As part of the book Dune. And we're talking about the movie Dune as well.
Obviously, we're going to spoil Dune.
Only a little bit.
Okay.
Only broad strokes. I won't say anything that wasn't in the movie.
Amazing.
There are some big things in the book that, I know Villeneuve is going to drop at a different moment because they're too big to just not put in the movie.
Yeah. Also, we should say this episode, we're recording this before Dune Part 2 has come out. And I think we're dropping this right around the time Part 2 drops. So, or it comes out and
Look
drops.
for an episode there.
Yeah, right. But so that's just for that context. Dune Part 2 has not yet been released at the time of recording.
So yeah, this will this will work if you haven't read the book, if you've seen the movie. If you haven't read the book or seen the movie, best of luck to you.
Good luck. Keep it up.
For movie viewers, book 1 of Dune basically ends at the end of that tent scene after the Harkonnen raid and the sort of fall of the House of Atreides.
Paul and Jessica are in the tent.
Paul and
they,
Jessica
escaped. Yeah.
Paul gets hit with the spice blast and trips balls for
That's
the
right.
first time.
Good for him.
So it basically ends there. And my thoughts are about the story up until that point. I just kind of jotted these down yesterday after I finished the book. The big thing that stuck out to me, and this is Frank Herbert's Dune, 1965, I believe.
Sounds about right.
That date is important, and we'll get to that later. But
okay.
Frank Herbert, of all the genre writers I've read, and I'm not incredibly well versed in sci-fi. I've said this before, I prefer to read my fantasy and watch my sci-fi, or play my sci-fi.
Yeah.
But so I'm coming to this from more of a fantasy experience.
Okay.
We always hate that fantasy and sci-fi are grouped together at Barnes and Noble,
because they're so distinct from one another. I mean, the fan base crosses over, but not a ton. Anyway, yeah.
So that's my background. The thing that really stuck out to me, and this might be more common in the genre than I know, I'll caveat it like that. Frank Herbert leads with dialogue.
Okay.
And you and I, when we discuss books, I know you always love when things are character focused.
I
When
sure
writers,
do.
when they prioritize characterization and character development. And this has that. But I really want to specify, this doesn't feel character focused. It's particularly conversation focused.
Okay.
So much, if your eyes just kind of glance down the page, almost everything is dialogue.
Interesting.
There is occasional description, and it is gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's those beautiful kind of pinprick images that set this world of Arrakis on fire. But it's so restrained and efficient.
Okay.
Like, it's not lacking for description, but the overwhelming majority of it feels like dialogue.
That's funny. This feels like total opposite of Tolkien. Tolkien was so description focused, and he had actually very little dialogue. Even often he would like describe what people were saying in the narration, like in a paragraph, and not through actual on-page dialogue. So that's funny.
It's a departure as well from George R. R. Martin. Of course, we're reading Game of Thrones right now. We're doing those episodes every Friday, and this felt very different in its attitude and priorities than that did. There's no value judgment there, but it's interesting. And it's not just dialogue all over these pages. It's character thoughts.
Okay.
In italics.
Oh, okay, cool.
And
from multiple characters?
Well, yeah, because it's a third-person POV. I mean, you're kind of leaning into one character per chapter.
Okay.
But you will get those italicized character thoughts frequently. It almost feels intrusive in a good way, in the same way intrusive thoughts are, where they can almost override what's happening in the current moment. There is that subtext kind of bleeding through.
Okay.
And sometimes you do get those character thoughts from multiple characters within the same scene. There was one chapter I'm remembering it was pretty cleanly cut out of the movie. It was good, but I understand pacing reasons.
Yeah.
It was Hawat, who's sort of that chief of security there, short guy.
Okay.
It's him and Lady Jessica. And they're trying to find out who the Harkonnen spy is. Another interesting thing in the book, from the first line of his thoughts that the Doctor is a traitor.
Oh, interesting.
So
I forgot about that.
His whole character arc is him wrestling with that.
Wow,
and
that's
trying
cool.
to make up for that. It's a very interesting way of handling it, and I'll get to that later. But Herbert seems to delight in spoiling things and then still executing them really well.
Well, that's fun because then you kind of get to just see how it plays out and try to figure out what's going to go where. I like that.
By the way, apologies if I mispronounce things during this episode, but
they're all made up names, so it's fine.
Sure, it's Hawat and Lady Jessica, and they don't know if the other one is the spy, so they're trying to sort of prove their loyalties and test the other one.
Cool.
And you're getting this rapid fire dialogue and the thoughts and reactions of both characters, which really gives you a sense of that spycraft, because you're seeing how she's registering something he says and processing it and then coming up with an acceptable, leveled, restrained retort. And you really see the chess moves for every side of a conversation. It's incredibly exciting. And
very cool.
It made this sci-fi that I was worried was going to feel, that dry, hard sci-fi.
Just technology descriptions.
Yeah,
just
that's what I was
rolling
expecting.
back. Right.
It felt so approachable.
Cool.
And immediate. I mean, I'm sure this is the bias of having just seen and adored the movie.
Sure, yeah.
But it felt almost like reading a screenplay. It had that sort of speed to it.
Wow.
And I guess this is my stupid bias, but I wasn't expecting that. And I was so thrilled when I found it.
You don't expect that from a 1960s sci-fi novel.
Yeah, okay.
Especially when they're this beefy. You expect it to be kind of slow and, sweeping and cool, but also kind of like Tolkien, where you kind of get bogged down. And I'm sorry to make that comparison constantly, but I think that's the best comparison. But because they're kind of contemporary to each other, they're big names and iconic pieces in their respective genres, and they cover a long period of time and this big made up world. So they're really similar.
It's storytelling on a grand scale.
Yeah, so you expect it to be kind of Tolkienian like that, and
almost glacial.
It's interesting that it's not like that at all. That's cool.
Yeah. The thing I did expect, and this is again coming from the movie, is that Shakespearean thrust.
Yeah.
Because this, I mean, I don't know where it's going to go from here. I know bits from the end of the first movie, but then I'm in completely uncharted territory. The thing I adored about the first movie is that Shakespearean structure, because I liked the whole movie. It's 2 hours. The second one's closer to 3 hours. But if the movie had ended when Leto died, that I would have been.
That would have been great.
Everything after that was overtime. That was gravy for me. I was already sold. Yeah. Because I love that fall of a major house, the betrayals.
That's a great little arc. It's a great way to especially if this is a part one, what a great way to set up,
Yes.
your chosen one character.
And
but then it kept going, which is so
Right.
amazing.
And I've tried to adjust sort of the way I'm thinking about this story, because going into the book, I was thinking about it in 2 parts. But of course, the book is then divided into 3 parts. So I think
Yeah.
I'm still kind of working on that.
Okay.
But the thing that immediately layered onto that architecture for me is Henry IV,
Okay.
which is a story in 2 parts. It's a play in 2 parts.
Mm.
And the first one ends with the death of the older king.
Right.
And then the second one is a more melancholic aftermath, philosophical meditation on what just happened that moves the survivors forward as the young prince becomes the king. And then you have the next play in Shakespeare's chronology,
Yeah.
Henry V, which is that young prince Hal becoming the next Henry after his father. So looking at this book, I'm immediately grafting that on top of it, right?
Of course,
You
yeah.
have that slow death of Leto or Henry IV, and you have all of these advisors. One of the biggest characters in Henry IV is Falstaff.
Oh, okay.
And it's all about the advisors who are close to the father, but also see the influence they have on the younger son. And that is the better long-term investment, because one day he's going to be king.
Sure, yeah.
And I was so enthralled by the supporting cast of this book.
Yeah.
You have characters like Duncan Idaho, who, and again, I had IMDb open while I was reading this, and it really helped.
I mean,
it really helped.
the first time I read Game of Thrones, I was so thankful that I had seen the first season of the show, because I would have been so lost. Just too many characters, So that's helpful.
And the supporting cast of the movie is so strong that it makes these characters incredibly memorable for me going into it. But when you have the characters played by Josh Brolin, Gurney. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Oops. You have him. You have Jason Momoa as Duncan Idaho. All of these people feel like, oh, maybe they'll be the Falstaff.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll be this unreliable sort of shepherd for the young prince. But the thing that really struck me here is the prominence of Lady Jessica.
Oh, okay.
Because you remember that line in the movie? This was like, even the other day in IMAX, I looked over, he was like, what the fuck was that about? It was right before that raid started.
Yeah.
When Leto said, I should have married you.
Yeah, and you're like 45 minutes into the movie, and you're like, they're not married?
Because I just assumed she was like
the
Duchess, I
the
guess,
Duchess,
if he's the Duke.
Yeah, I was very confused.
And she's like a concubine. And they
Okay.
explain that more in the book.
Okay.
I guess they could have laid that track a little stronger in the movie.
They should have, I think.
But the whole point is, because she's a Bene Gesserit, and because he is still trying to shore up his geopolitical position, the appearance of him not being married, which means that he could be married off to some other great house and form some important link, that makes him more attractive
Sure.
in some of those dealings.
That is interesting, though, that even still, Paul is like legitimate heir. Even if he's not
right.
like a typical, as you would expect, legitimate son.
And the book plays with the fragility and sensitivity of that position in a really exciting way.
Cool.
But it also sort of makes Lady Jessica kind of that Falstaff candidate, because she has these interesting relationships with, I guess, the king-like character and the prince-like character. So I really got a lot out of that. And it made me appreciate Rebecca Ferguson's fantastic performance in the movie
good.
even more. But the highlight here, of course, is the rise of Paul, who is that Hal character. And this is where I'm enjoying the deviation from that Shakespearean, which is just historical structure.
Yeah.
Because the Hal who rises through the ranks of both parts of Henry IV and then marches into Henry V, he is this heroic, historical, legendary figure. And from almost the first scene you get with Paul, you can see it doesn't look like it's going to go that way.
Okay.
You see that temptation of the dark side.
Yeah, okay.
Every time you get a glimpse into his head, he's wrestling with these urges and these temptations. He keeps referring to the terrible purpose that's waking up within him. And the other thing is, instead of having chapter titles, instead of having chapter numbers, you have these pull quotes.
Yes, I remember those.
From an unseen character, who I think is Florence Pugh in the second movie. So it's a character you haven't met.
Yes.
But they're also giving you this framing device. And from the books that are being quoted, it's this woman who's writing about this era of time.
See, that feels very Sapkowski to me. That's very fun.
It is. It is. But this is the thing I talked about earlier. Herbert is delighting in full-on death spoilers.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because those little chapter introductions mention Leto dying way before he dies.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they allude to all this ominous stuff that's going to happen with Paul.
Hmm.
So you have this almost shadow cast across what's happening that makes it feel so irresistible. It stokes like the bias of history there in those opener quotes. It gives you this feeling of dread and inevitability. It's a very exciting way to write, where it feels like a history in a little bit of the same way George R. R. Martin's writing does,
Right.
but almost more so because it has that pallor and grandeur to it. The next thing I want to talk about is Arrakis.
Okay.
I can't get enough of Arrakis.
I'm amazed. You're not a sunny desert boy.
I'm not. I'm an indoor cat. But I find this world of
You
Arrakis.
hiss at the sun.
I hate. I mean, the sun has betrayed me many times.
It sure has.
I got a sunburn so
Oh my
bad one
God.
time. The doctors didn't know what to do, and they called it It was something called
Like
Hell's Itch.
Hell's Itch. That's what it was. You had to just like take a shit ton of Benadryl.
It was like
Calmed it
stabbing
down.
needles, throbbing and
Like fire
piercing
ants.
all over my body. It was
actually really. I was there for that. It was terrible.
yeah. I don't go outside that much anymore. Or if I do, it's
That
controlled.
was the last time Cam's ever gone to the beach.
I
Never
wouldn't do
go
well
again.
on Arrakis
No,
for many different reasons.
You would perish immediately.
But I find this world enrapturing.
Yeah.
The strange devices, the history, the technology, and you can feel the excitement from Herbert. The way he's writing this world, you can he feels excited to share this with you.
Yeah.
Where again, I expected it to feel dry, and it doesn't. I mean, even though
I was gonna
it's
say
a
like
desert planet,
sand.
but it doesn't feel like that at all because he's always teasing these secrets, and he knows the most interesting pieces of his puzzle, and he leads with that. The build up to the sandworms. Every time they're mentioned or alluded to, there's this excitement. Every reference feels magnetic and terrifying.
Cool.
And that eventual reveal that you get when they're in that weirdly named helicopter.
Oh yes.
When Leto's doing that dive to try to rescue the guys from
that scene.
the spice collector thing.
So cool. Yeah.
You expect the sandworm, when it finally appears, to feel like Jaws, the shark from Jaws,
Yeah.
or Godzilla, where it's this huge presence that like changes your understanding of scale, but you watch it kind of moving across the world. And when it finally pops up, like I haven't forgotten the way he describes the teeth inside the thing, because the mouth of a sandworm,
Yep.
it's a big circle with a lot of teeth pointing inwards.
Yes.
And he described the teeth like spokes.
Ooh. Okay.
And up until that point, I had felt this like strong biological sense to
Yeah.
these worms.
Okay. Yeah.
Where they felt so mythic and alive and real. And I was looking in the glossary in the back, and it said water is poisonous to them. So I was really thinking about them like, I had my little, who's the Australian guy with the shorts? The crocodile guy?
Steve Irwin.
I had my Steve Irwin shorts on.
Okay.
And I was trying to look at them as animals and understand them that way.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, why I make that Jaws or Godzilla comparison. But when the sandworm finally explodes out of the desert, it felt almost Lovecraftian.
Oh, cool.
It felt so massive and remote and mythic. It felt, I mean, it's just a worm that's crusty
Just a big old
in the
worm.
sand. It should be the most pedestrian thing that you could throw into a hard genre work of fiction. But it feels unimaginable and eternal and epic.
Yeah.
I can't get away from the sandworms. I spent 10 minutes the other day Googling if I could buy a sandworm Funko Pop.
Can you?
Not an official one, but there's another one, and it's weird looking, but I would put it on my desk. And I didn't think I would say that when I started this book. I didn't think I wanted a sandworm staring back at me.
I am just amazed at. I'm really. This is about to sound really condescending. I'm amazed that you're reading this book. But what I mean by that is, if you don't know, Cam is mostly an audiobook guy. And also, like, apart from what we're reading for the podcast, which is like slow, intentional, methodical, like analytic, chapter by chapter read throughs of our fantasy books, Cam doesn't usually like read big books for fun, especially not big books that have glossaries in the back where you have to look things up.
That's true.
Like, Cam doesn't usually do that. Cam likes short fiction, Cam likes nonfiction, and he particularly likes a really solid audiobook. Cam doesn't like sit down and read an 800-page book or however long this thing is. So I'm very active on like BookTube and that kind of thing. Like I listen to people recommend books all the time.
And Goodreads.
Right. I have never been so enamored by a book recommendation than your recommendation of Dune just now. Like,
well, I'm glad.
I need to go read this book now. I need to go back to it.
I mean, that's the point of the show. Every episode is us enthusiastically advocating for a work of art.
Because when I put it down, it wasn't that I wasn't liking it. I just realized I was in the mood for something else. And then I just, years went by and I forgot about it. But well, I got to try this again.
I have a section of notes sort of on that.
Okay.
Because the connection I made for even to me, it's sort of strange and unexpected that I dove into this book so hard. I think I really, really love reading books after watching adaptations.
Okay.
And I know most people go the other way.
Yeah, right. Like, oh, you got to read the book first. Right. Uh-huh.
But I love reading books after the adaptations, and for some reason, I get way more out of the book. The last book that I just sat down and devoured is Tarantino's novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
That's right. Uh-huh.
And I blew through that thing.
Yeah.
But when I was reading this, I had the IMDb open for the first 100 pages, just as like kind of training wheels.
Just to help you. Yeah.
To help keep me oriented in this unfolding massive world.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of the first time I read Game of Thrones, because I tried keeping little notes.
That's right. Doing your little homework assignment to keep track of everybody.
Like my experience with Game of Thrones, I was so blown away that I felt oriented from the very beginning. And I think part of that is the structure of this book, which pulls me back to my preferences that I really came to terms with when we were reading the Witcher books and going through that Sapkowski journey. Because most of the chapters in this book are one scene per chapter.
Okay.
And that sort of pace really works for me.
It does.
It's clear.
You like that a lot.
It's satisfying. It keeps the chapters from being too long, which is incredibly important to me.
Long chapters are the worst.
Because it gives you that sense of progression.
Yeah, right. It's
and
motivation. Which is like, it feels so stupid to need and want that, but that's how human brains operate. So what are you going to do? And
again, with that sort of uneasy comparison to a screenplay, the pacing of one scene per chapter makes me realize or sort of rediscover how excellently paced this narrative is. Because you are making such steady progress through this world and these characters, leapfrogging between these largely different Atreides POVs, but drilling through the world of Caladan. Then quickly you're moving into Arrakis. I felt so immersed and excited. There were just things popping up all over the place. Rich new plots and set pieces. I can give the compliment to Herbert that I think is becoming my greatest compliment to any creative. His work feels like it's bursting with ideas. It's never stuffy or dull, which is what I fear from all genre work. That it will feel that way. And at the beginning of this conversation, sorry for monopolizing it, but I've got my fun little notes here.
You read, I didn't. I'm here to enjoy.
I tried to flag at the beginning that this came out in 1965.
Yeah.
And the reason I wanted to orient it there is that the first Star Wars movie came out 12 years after this book was published.
Yeah.
I find this scandalizing to recognize the similarities, the echoes, the copycats, the architecture of Star Wars in reverse. And stumbling upon all the points at which Star Wars commercializes and simplifies and dumbs down what Frank Herbert is doing here, because it feels so crude. And I'm not saying, we love the first couple Star Wars movies. There's a lot there. They're fun.
Great. They're solid.
They work as fantastic commercial entertainment.
Yeah.
And putting that sort of framework on Dune feels so ass backwards in a fun way. Like when you start reading, you're like, okay, the Bene Gesserit, they've got these weird powers. They seem like they're kind of good. They're trying to keep a hand on the wheel. Okay, they're kind of like the Jedi.
Yeah, right. Uh-huh.
And then you meet the Harkonnens, and it's kind of the Sith.
And there's an emperor, right? Empire.
Exactly. They're closer to the emperor.
Yeah.
And even like the Baron in the movie, he looks like Darth Vader without the helmet on.
That's true.
There's some of that there.
Yeah.
But the more you see of these characters in this world, the more nuance and thorny, provocative depth has been stripped out in that comparison.
Yeah, right.
You see like the sparse notification of Dune being translated into Star Wars. And I loved watching this story and these ideas accordion out past that simplified version that I was used to.
Cool.
Because the Bene Gesserit are not Jedi.
No.
They're not these like active holy medieval knights.
Right.
Because that's, the Jedi sort of are that. They're supposed to be these noble knights. It's just that their swords look weird.
Yeah.
But the Bene Gesserit are they're more like Littlefinger or Varys from Game of Thrones, but like stepped up a notch with some
Right.
weird magical stuff kind of sprinkled on top.
Weird religion magic, yeah.
They're architects. They're backstage influencers. They're not a holy order. They want to be the wizard behind the curtain.
Sure.
You know, they don't want to be the emperor themselves.
Yeah, because they don't need to be.
Right, and it goes back to that the prevalence of dialogue and thoughts. You see the level of spycraft throughout this story that reminded me more of Game of Thrones than it did anything like Star Wars. But it's so front-loaded here. It's so important. It's so deft in its footing. And I just kept having these sort of cascading revelations. The more I saw of the Harkonnens, you get a couple chapters basically from the Baron's perspective. Yeah. And I devoured those because they're such interesting characters in the book.
Cool.
In the movie. Stellan Skarsgård is so good.
Yeah.
And you get more of that.
Yeah.
And you learn pretty quick. I mean, even from watching the movie, the Harkonnens are not the Sith. That's too simple and stupid, too. They aren't just like good guys turned evil giving in to temptation. The lines are never drawn that clearly in this story, in either the book source material or the movie adaptation. There are no lines really drawn at all. Like, did you notice just watching the movie how Leto, being the head of House Atreides, Oscar Isaac's character, him and the Baron were kind of just two sides of the same coin?
Yeah, in a sense. Yeah. Yeah,
Like,
it was interesting.
They were working toward a common purpose.
Right. I liked the complexity of like the emperor, the empire is like working with House Atreides, but then also House Atreides is kind of not wanting to do what the empire wants to do. So they're like on the same side, but also not. That complexity was really cool to me.
Like, we get the sense that there's more honor in the way House Atreides conducts itself.
Sure, certainly, yeah.
Then the Harkonnens seem to be more brutish, and they seem to cut corners.
Right.
But there's a shared, acknowledged, open self-interest there.
Yeah.
They're both trying to advance the best interest of their house.
And they're both like willing, like openly willing to go to this other planet and
colonize
and steal a resource that is not theirs. Yeah.
Right. And they want to massage these other relationships with the other houses, with the emperor. There's more similarity there than would be comfortable in something like Star Wars.
Right. It's much more black and white in Star Wars.
It's not a world of like simple, what color is your lightsaber, binary moral codes. It's a world of constant calculation. And I really enjoyed how kind of light, what a light step that gives a lot of this story. I mean, even if you tried to throw the big Star Wars thing, like what is the Force in the world of Dune? Is it that weird power that the Bene Gesserit seem to have? Is it
the
spice?
voice? Yeah, is it the spice? Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But I like wrestling with those questions and sort of deconstructing those frameworks.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and of course you've got Paul and Luke both, wrestling with temptations toward the dark side and all that. Yeah, so that makes sense.
And their place, their inheritance in this massive world. I want to close, and this is, I guess, more mutual for both of us. I want to close with just a moment of discussion about adaptation.
Okay.
Because the more I read of this source material, the more I love Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah,
a guy
so
I've
great.
adored for years.
Yeah.
All of his movies have just blown me away. And this adaptation is so top tier. He loses just a couple scenes, but they're very cleanly cut in the narrative. There are things that it would be nice if there was a big extended version. Sure, you could have some of those scenes in there, but it works without it.
Yeah, okay.
And he keeps all the best lines and just moves them around.
Nice.
Like he's keeping all the best stuff, and it's not a hatchet job.
Yeah.
Like so many of the adaptations that we see are. It is the perfect counterpoint to The Witcher show. This is a loving second nature translation of a story where you can feel, it feels like Lord of the Rings. And I don't just mean that in its execution, in how grand and beautiful the movie is, like how swept up you get in that world, but the love and loyalty for the source material. It's so palpable when you read the book. It feels like my copy is circled and underlined by Denis Villeneuve. Like he feels as excited about this work as I do experiencing it for the first time. And even in interviews with him, he's loved this since he was a kid. Like the casting, the technology, the settings, this world is so excitedly, startlingly realized on screen. It just, I keep getting swept up with this contagious sense of awe that the whole cast and crew seems to have for this world. And it just, it's lightened me up too.
Yeah, I feel like you can tell when a creator is adapting something or you're working with a source material that they have loved since childhood. I think that's always really abundantly clear.
Yes.
And it's, even if they don't do a good job, you can still feel the passion for it, and that still makes it feel good. Like Denis Villeneuve happens to also have done an amazing job, but even if there were some problems with the adaptation, like some budget concerns or some, like they didn't cast a great actor for whatever, like you can still feel that passion there and that adoration for the source material. And I think that is what's missing from so many adaptations like The Witcher show, right? Like you need that admiration for, even if you make a lot of changes. I don't necessarily mean like book to screen accuracy.
No.
I just mean appreciation for and respect for the material, and that's really clear in this.
It's interesting because words like respect or reverence, they feel dry.
Yeah.
They feel stale in a way. It's got to be more active than that. There has to be something more passionate. It really does. I mean, the word is too simple maybe for this idea, but it is a love for the source material. And there is a smell test where you can just clock it in an adaptation.
Yeah.
I love this world so much. I'm really enjoying my time with this book.
I really did love seeing the part one week or two ago, and I'm so excited to see the next one. And now like I said, I'm gonna go read the book now.
Well, I hope everyone does.
Also, last night I made a spice cake in honor of Dune.
Yes,
by
you
the
did.
way,
and it was delightful.
maybe I'll grab a slice of that now and crack open the book. But this is really fun. Thank you for taking me on this journey.
If I have some more thoughts on part 2 and part 3, we'll do a follow-up here.
Sure, yeah.
And if we have enough to say about it, we'll do an episode on part 2 when the movie drops. So,
earlier you said part 2. You meant book 2 and book 3.
Yes, I did.
Of the book. And then and then if we have thoughts on the movie part 2, we'll do that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I plan to read through Dune Messiah and finish that Paul Atreides story.
Cool.
I don't know if I'll read the other. It's 6 books by Frank Herbert and then a bunch written by his son.
That's right, yeah. And people have a lot of opinions about the later books.
People have opinions about even the later Frank Herbert books.
Yeah,
Apparently they get real weird, but that's fine. I'm good with weird.
I trust this man.
So go check out our episode on the movie, the first movie, if you haven't seen that one.
Yeah, in 2021 when the movie came out. Yeah,
it was we've been doing this a while.
We have.
And of course, look forward to that future coverage. Thank you very much for joining us. If you want even more episodes from us, we have 2 episodes a week. We do wild cards here on Tuesdays, and then on Fridays we're doing that death march through Game of Thrones.
It's a beautiful death march.
I mean that in the best possible way. I argue that George R. R. Martin is a coroner.
That's right.
In the way he writes fantasy.
Yeah.
But if you want even more from us, we do bonus episodes over on Patreon. You can support the show $2 a month, and you get the back catalog of our bonus episodes. About 2 years we've been throwing
all kinds of stuff in there.
Throwing episodes, wood on the pile there. We did 2 episodes in the month of February.
That's right,
we did our breakfast buffet, which is a big roundup of a bunch of movies that have come out lately, all of our thoughts on those. And we did an episode on Godzilla -1 - Color,
That's right.
which was another epic, grand, beautiful experience we had in the theater. So thank you for joining us. Go read Dune.
And if you're on YouTube, like this video, comment down below what you think of Dune. Have you read the books? Is it worth going through all the rest of them? What do you think of the adaptation? Please, no spoilers. We've only,
please.
Nothing beyond Dune Part 1, please, for the love of God. And others. I mean, I guess it's not fair. This book series is 60 years old, but come on, please. But otherwise, subscribe to our channel. Obviously, you can click the bell for notifications, all that stuff. Our YouTube has really been growing the past couple months.
Yes,
it's been really fun to see, and we're so thankful to have y'all here with us. So
thank you very much, and we will see you with a brand new episode on Friday.
Bye.